Okay, I'm probably going to speak ad lib rather than go through my slides too much, on the condition that you have a look at our report, because I spent a long time working on it, and it's really interesting and worth reading. I'm also going to make a link. I was here all day earlier, and I want to make a link to some of the other stuff that was referenced. So, as Amisha said, I'm from the Royal Society of Arts. The full name of the RSA is actually the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce. And we're about 250 years old, and we're based just the other side of Trafalgar Square on the Strand. I mention that because we've had an ongoing concern with how business relates to society. And that's, I guess, what drew me to coming and participating today, speaking to you, but also has kind of kept my interest going for about 10 years. It's actually, I'm thinking back, it's 10 years since I started getting curious about what the role of a large retail store can be and is beyond just shopping. So the report we just released is called Shopping for Shared Value. I'll talk a little bit more about what I learned today and some interesting points for me and some new directions. And I think in the spirit of openness, I was impressed that actually today some of the team from Provenance and a bunch of collaborators have actually pulled together on Google Docs open notes from the day. So I encourage you to go and have a look at those. You can find the link on Twitter. So for me, all of this connecting the stories of products is part of this journey of globalization that we've been on, not just for 20 or 30 years, but for hundreds of years, connecting our world, connecting different resources and people across the world. And really today for me was a powerful moment of thinking, we all, I think somewhere inside us have this desire to think, how can we fight back to understand the kind of flows that shape our world and that increasingly shape our world. And we increasingly feel that we don't understand them and that we can't understand them. And I think we heard at the beginning of the day from open corporates. That's a very interesting model, because what they've tried to kind of lift the lid on is how corporate structures flow, how money flows, how ownership flows. Most of the rest of the day was spent really thinking about the architecture that we would need to build in data terms, a way of unpacking data around products. And I think, so we're starting with products, and I think it's really important to start with products. I think to an extent it's true that you are what you eat and you are what you wear, and that's an expression of our identity and it's important. I think consumption is a hugely worthy place to start, and I'll go into a few reasons for that. But I also want to make the point, and I'm glad a couple of others touched on it, that we're more than consumers. We are citizens as well as consumers. We hold both of those things in us all the time at the same time, and we try and reconcile those things together. And I really think, based on the 6 months of research that we did, which was mostly focused on large retail stores, big box stores, supermarkets, out-of-town stores, I think along the way we found really that the next challenge for entrepreneurs in retail, disruptive retail approaches, models, business cases, platforms, is to reconcile those aspirations and to do so in a way that socializes, because it connects our consumption decisions to those of the people that we know. So connecting us to people we know, it localizes it, connects our consumption decisions to the geography of production and the locality of where we live. So people we know, firstly, places we know, secondly. And I really think if you look at what big, kind of the big new retail players like eBay and Amazon are doing and what they're concerned with, there is this spatialized aspect of online now. And the online is about location, delivering to you in place, and that location still matters. And it's easy to forget that location and togetherness and face-to-face interaction really matters. I mean, why are we in the Hub Westminster today? Why didn't we just have this open data powwow online with virtual conferencing? It's because face-to-face still has a real value. And in fact, the more ubiquitous and the more easy it is for us to connect online, the more kind of rare and special and valuable it is to get together, and events like this are part of that. The whole model of the hubs around the world is about that. These are people who work from laptops but like being in a building with hundreds of other people and feeding off their ideas. It struck me today that in a lot of conversations, when we were imagining this kind of data-rich, values-led, integrated world, we always started with, well, I'll be walking down the shopping aisle and I'll point my phone. So we couldn't escape the concept that shopping is still a physical experience. That's kind of what our research in the last 6 months focused on. The opportunities that are presented by that physical experience to do more than just shopping and to think about more than just price. So one thing, if you think about large national chain retailers, mainstream retailers in the UK, it's evident to us that price and location, convenience, are somewhat exhausted as frontiers of competition. So we have price matching among supermarkets, we have price comparison websites, we have locations everywhere, we have tens of thousands of retail stores, we have 20 square miles of physical retail space in this country. And with convenience, we have 24-hour online shopping. So if I am a large retailer or if I am a big store, how do I remain relevant in that kind of world? How do I convince people to keep coming through my front door so that I can engage with them, build a relationship with them, build trust with them, build some of these values? That's kind of what our research considered. So just a bit on the kind of research we did. We were led by a qualitative approach. We did workshops, interviews. We worked with ASDA specifically, who provided funding for the project, but also access to their data and to their customers. And we reached out further than that to look at wider communities. Some of the bullets here have got slightly misaligned. So I'll just race through some of the conclusions of that work before I conclude myself. We really understand that shops are social spaces that feed our needs as social beings. That's why the concept of physical shopping is not just going to die. It's going to be reinvented. It will need to be reinvented. Shops will need to serve a slightly different function within retail. But for example, our research found 40% of people in a big box store like a B&Q or an Asda talked to other customers, other people they didn't know when they were there. They asked for advice. They got an opinion. They said, oh, I've seen you down the park. It's a really important social space in a world where other social spaces are also threatened. The scale of retail is so important. It is the opportunity. The scale of interactions, there are 46 million retail transactions every week. That's more people engaging with buying something than, if you think about it, step back, more people than engage in the labour market, more people than go to work any day, more people than voted in the political system in the last general election. One thing I haven't highlighted, 3 of these workers, 3 million people, work in retail. So 10% of our workforce actually works in retail, and of those, most of them work in a kind of public-facing role. So there's a responsibility to them. That's an opportunity to build the conversations and tell the stories, connect the data, guide people to realizing their consumption choices as more than consumers, as citizens who can reconcile those values as well. We looked at some of these disruptive platforms, which all the big retailers, the national retailers, are interested in, concerned about, worried about. And really, we tried to find what opportunities to use this, in a large store, like a large Asda, 50,000 people coming through the front door every week, 500 staff. The space that we've inherited, we have inherited a retail infrastructure to sell things that is huge, that is well developed, that is globally competitive, and it's being disrupted hugely by online. So we're going to have a lot of retail space that we need to reconfigure and reconsider, use it for other commercial purposes, food, leisure, teaching, and in an era where a lot of public services are threatened, perhaps more. Perhaps it's a community space. Perhaps it's a place where we have public services like libraries or after-school clubs, art galleries, inside of these places where they're already gathering. So it's a similar kind of community hub model to the high street. The high street is another kettle of fish that has its own issues and its own seminars and events where they discover those. We highlighted the role of data sharing in our report. I just want to highlight these stats here. Data sharing is 2 ways. It's not just big retailers opening up their data about consumption or about products, but actually it's public agencies and community bodies telling a story about data to retailers in order to achieve outcomes that they're working towards in a social sense, socially desirable. So, for example, 2 of the stores we were looking at, one is in Tilbury, to the east of London. It's a dock town in the borough of Thurrock. And another store was the Clapham Junction Asda in Wandsworth. So basic kind of social statistics, we can see that obesity is different, is twice as big a problem in Thurrock as in Wandsworth, but household overcrowding is almost twice as big a problem in Wandsworth as in Thurrock. Now those are some of the conditions of social need locally that retail has a role in addressing, and we must see retailers as having a role in addressing those social issues. It's also a business opportunity. If I was running the Clapham Junction store, I might sell more space-saving devices, or I might decide to use some of my store as a home workspace because I know that there are a lot of overcrowded households. Whereas if I was trying to engage with public authorities about my role in health, obesity is a different issue in different places. So these are some of our recommendations. We recommend that retailers take a role in what we call community venturing. I'll rush through this, you don't need to read it all. But part of that story is sharing data, but it's also sharing responsibility. We saw promising signs of it emerging, retailers engaging in their local areas. It's also worth saying that when we think about that opportunity, right, 50,000 people going through a big store every week, this is where we should locate some of the social infrastructure and some of the data sharing that currently doesn't have an audience. This is an amazing community calendar of events that is happening in Oldham, near Manchester, and no one really uses it. But if you could put this on a touchscreen by the checkouts and say, we are your local supermarket, we support knowing what's going on locally, have a browse of this, that's where these kind of things meet the public. Other opportunities to use the space, ping pong in the car parks, mobile swimming pools in area with no swimming pools, using car parks at night for football games. This is actually another Nike project called Mi Pista, which is using lasers to make football pitches at night. So we were really encouraging retailers to think about themselves and their spaces as more than retail. As I said, data was part of that story. And I guess my concluding remarks are about the challenge that I see. So as I said, we've inherited the retail infrastructure that we have, the spaces that we have, but also the corporations. So I think engaging with retailers, with manufacturing brands that are existing large behemoths and can be very difficult to engage, is a totally valid theory of change for a socially minded organization or a business model. I think it's not all about, disrupting and hacking in a kind of outsider model. There is a lot to do by engaging directly with the corporates that we've inherited as big retailers. And so I guess what I'm saying is we shouldn't abandon those spaces. We should simply engage with them. And I guess our report is a roadmap for how a large retailer would go about doing that. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.